What if I told you that right now, as you're listening to this, there could be entire civilizations thriving in the crushing darkness of our planet's deepest trenches? What if the very place we consider most hostile to life is actually a gateway to something far more extraordinary than we ever imagined? I'm about to take you on a journey to the edge of possibility, where cutting-edge science meets the stuff of nightmares and dreams. We're going to explore what would happen if the Mariana Trench, that 11-kilometer deep scar in the Pacific Ocean floor, suddenly cracked open to reveal not just alien life, but an entire ecosystem so advanced, so perfectly adapted, that it makes us question whether we're really alone on our own planet. Now, before we dive into this abyss of speculation, let me paint you a picture of just how alien our deepest oceans already are. We're talking about a world where the pressure is over 1,000 times greater than at sea level, where temperatures hover just above freezing despite being closer to the Earth's molten core, where no sunlight has ever penetrated, and where the very concept of up and down becomes meaningless in the eternal darkness. But here's what's going to blow your mind. In the last decade, we've discovered life forms down there that shouldn't exist according to everything we thought we knew about biology. Creatures that feed on chemicals spewing from underwater volcanoes. Organisms that can withstand pressure that would instantly liquefy a human being. Fish with antifreeze proteins in their blood. And bacteria that thrive in conditions more extreme than the surface of Mars. So if life this extraordinary already exists in our deepest trenches, what happens when we imagine something even more incredible? What if these trenches aren't just the bottom of our ocean, but the top of something else entirely? Let me tell you about the morning everything changed. It was the 15th of March, 2025, when Dr. Sarah Chen received a call that would make her question everything she thought she knew about marine biology. The Deep Sea Research Institute had been monitoring seismic activity around the Challenger Deep for months, tracking what they assumed were routine tectonic shifts. But at 3:47 a.m. Pacific time, their sensors detected something that made no sense whatsoever. The readings showed a massive displacement of water, as if something the size of a city had just moved 11 kilometers below the surface. But that was impossible. Nothing that large could exist at those depths, let alone move with the fluid grace their instruments were detecting. The pressure alone should have prevented any structure of that magnitude from maintaining its integrity. Dr. Chen assembled an emergency dive team within hours. Using the most advanced deep-sea submersible ever constructed, they descended into the abyss, not knowing they were about to become the first humans to witness something that would rewrite the textbooks on planetary biology. As they passed through the various zones of the ocean, each darker and more hostile than the last, their instruments began detecting anomalies. The water temperature was fluctuating in patterns that seemed almost rhythmic, like a massive heartbeat pulsing through the depths. Electromagnetic readings spiked and dropped in ways that defied explanation. And then, at a depth of 10.5 kilometers, they saw it. The seafloor wasn't solid. It was moving, breathing, rippling like the surface of a lake disturbed by an unfelt breeze. And carved into what they had always assumed was lifeless sediment were structures, geometric patterns that stretched for kilometers in every direction, tunnels that descended even deeper into the Earth's crust. And rising from these alien architectures, streams of bioluminescent particles that danced through the water like living constellations. But this is where our story takes a turn that even Dr. Chen couldn't have prepared for. Because as their submersible's light swept across these impossible formations, something swept back. A beam of coherent light, focused and deliberate, emerged from one of the tunnel openings and tracked their vessel with the precision of intelligence. They weren't just looking at alien life. Alien life was looking back at them. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like science fiction, right? But here's the thing that's going to keep you awake tonight. Every single element I just described, every impossible condition, every extreme environment already exists in our deepest trenches. We've just never considered what might happen if life down there evolved not just to survive, but to thrive, to build, to think. Consider this. Life on Earth appeared almost as soon as our planet could support it, roughly 4 billion years ago. But for most of that time, the deepest parts of our oceans have remained virtually unchanged. While surface life has been through countless extinction events, ice ages, and evolutionary upheavals, the deep ocean has remained constant. A stable environment where evolution has had 4 billion uninterrupted years to work its magic. What could 4 billion years of evolution produce in an environment we've barely begun to explore? What kind of intelligence might emerge in a world where communication happens through bioluminescence, where pressure and chemical gradients replace sound and sight as primary senses, where time moves differently because there are no days or seasons to mark its passage? The more we learn about extremophile organisms, life forms that thrive in conditions we once thought impossible, the more we realize that our definition of habitable is embarrassingly narrow. We've found bacteria living in nuclear reactors, thriving in acid hot enough to melt metal, reproducing in the vacuum of space. We've discovered entire ecosystems around deep-sea volcanic vents that operate on completely different principles than surface life, deriving energy from chemical processes rather than photosynthesis. But what if these aren't just isolated adaptations? What if they're glimpses of something far more sophisticated? What if the deepest trenches of our oceans are home to a form of life so advanced that it makes us look like pond scum by comparison? Think about it this way. We've explored less than 5% of our oceans. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the deepest parts of our own planet. And every time we send probes into these alien depths, we discover something that challenges our understanding of what life can be and do. In 2019, researchers found microbes living 7 miles below the seafloor, in rocks where no life should be able to exist. These organisms had been cut off from the surface world for millions of years, yet they had not only survived, but created their own complex ecosystem. They had evolved ways to extract energy from the rocks themselves, essentially eating the planet from the inside out. In 2021, we discovered the deepest fish ever recorded, swimming at depths where the pressure should have crushed every bone in its body. Yet there it was, not just surviving but thriving, adapted to an environment more hostile than the depths of space. And just last year, scientists detected patterns in deep-sea volcanic activity that seemed too regular, too purposeful, to be natural. Hydrothermal vents activating in sequences, mineral deposits forming geometric shapes, chemical releases that synchronized across thousands of miles of ocean floor, almost as if something down there was orchestrating these events. So when I ask you to imagine what would happen if the Mariana Trench opened to reveal alien life, I'm not asking you to suspend disbelief. I'm asking you to expand your definition of possible. Because the truth is, alien life might not be coming from the stars. It might be rising from the depths of our own world, from places so removed from our surface-dwelling perspective that we never thought to look for intelligence there. But here's where our hypothetical scenario gets really interesting. What happens to humanity when we discover that we're not alone on Earth? What happens when we realize that while we were looking up at the stars, searching for signals from distant civilizations, the most advanced intelligence on our planet was living right beneath our feet, in the deepest, darkest places we never thought to explore? The implications are staggering. Everything we know about evolution, about the development of intelligence, about our place in the hierarchy of Earth's life forms, suddenly gets turned upside down. We go from being the planet's dominant species to being newcomers in a world that's been hosting intelligence far longer than we ever imagined. And that's just the beginning of what we're about to explore together. But what happens next in our story is where things get truly mind-bending. Because Dr. Chen's team didn't just discover life in the Mariana Trench, they discovered life that had been watching us. As their submersible hung suspended in the crushing darkness, That beam of light continued to track their movements with mechanical precision, but then something extraordinary happened. The light began to pulse, not randomly but in patterns, mathematical sequences that any human scientist would recognize, prime numbers, the Fibonacci sequence, pi calculated to dozens of decimal places. This wasn't just intelligence, this was intelligence trying to communicate using the universal language of mathematics. And it was doing so with a sophistication that suggested it had been studying our surface world for far longer than we had been studying the depths. Dr. Chen made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her career. She ordered her pilot to respond. Using the submersible's external lights, they flashed back the same sequences, confirming that they understood. The response from below was immediate and overwhelming. The entire seafloor erupted in bioluminescent activity. Patterns of light began racing through what they had mistaken for sediment, revealing a vast network of interconnected structures that stretched beyond the range of their instruments. It was like watching a massive neural network suddenly come alive, synapses firing across kilometers of ocean floor, as information flowed through channels they were only beginning to comprehend. And then the seafloor began to open. Not violently, not like an earthquake or volcanic eruption, but with the deliberate precision of massive doors sliding apart. The water above shimmered and distorted as something enormous rose from the depths below the trench, something that had been hidden beneath what we thought was the deepest point on Earth. What Dr. Chen's team witnessed in those next few minutes would challenge every assumption we've ever made about the development of civilization on our planet, because rising from that impossible depth came structures that could only be described as architecture, spires that twisted upward through the water column like organic skyscrapers, their surfaces covered in patterns of light that pulsed with complex rhythms, transparent tubes that stretched between these structures, filled with streams of luminescent particles that moved with obvious purpose. But here's what's really going to mess with your head. Carbon dating of the materials they managed to collect suggested that these structures were millions of years old. Not thousands, not tens of thousands, but millions. Which means that while our earliest ancestors were still figuring out how to use stone tools, there was already an advanced civilization thriving in the deepest parts of our oceans. Think about the implications of that for a moment. We pride ourselves on being the first intelligent species on Earth, the first to develop technology, the first to build cities and create art and explore beyond our planet. But what if we're not the first at all? What if we're just the first to do it on dry land? The deep ocean represents the largest habitable space on our planet. It's three-dimensional in ways that surface environments aren't, offering countless layers and niches for life to evolve and thrive. While surface life has been constrained by gravity, weather, and the two-dimensional nature of land-based existence, deep ocean life has had access to vast vertical territories and resources we're only beginning to understand. And here's something that's going to blow your mind. The energy sources available in the deep ocean are actually more stable and long-lasting than anything available on the surface. Hydrothermal vents provide consistent heat and chemical energy that have been flowing for millions of years. Radioactive decay in the Earth's crust offers power sources that make our nuclear reactors look like birthday candles. And the mineral wealth of the deep seafloor contains elements and compounds that don't exist anywhere else on the planet. If you were an advanced civilization looking to build something that would last for geological timescales, the deep ocean would actually be a better choice than the surface. No weather to erode your structures, no ice ages to disrupt your development, no asteroid impacts to reset your progress. Just stable, consistent conditions that allow for uninterrupted growth and advancement. But let's get back to Dr. Chen's incredible discovery, because what happened next changed everything we thought we knew about the relationship between different forms of life on Earth. As those massive structures continued to rise from the depths, her team detected something that made their instruments go haywire. The water around them was filling with microscopic organisms unlike anything in any biology textbook. These weren't just bacteria or primitive life forms. They were clearly engineered, designed for specific purposes, with a precision that put our most advanced biotechnology to shame. Some of these organisms seemed to be sensors, collecting data about the submersible and its occupants, with an efficiency that suggested they were part of a vast information-gathering network. Others appeared to be constructors, assembling complex molecular structures in real time as the team watched. And some, most disturbingly, seemed to be studying the humans themselves, analyzing their biological signatures with an intensity that suggested profound scientific curiosity. Within hours of that first contact, Dr. Chen's team began experiencing changes. Nothing dramatic at first, just enhanced night vision, improved pressure tolerance, increased lung capacity. The engineered organisms they had encountered weren't just studying them, they were optimizing them, making subtle improvements to their physiology that allowed them to function better in the deep ocean environment. It was as if this ancient civilization had been waiting for surface dwellers to finally make contact and had prepared gifts to facilitate that interaction. Biomodifications that would allow humans to survive in the deep ocean depths, to communicate more effectively, to understand the vast networks of intelligence that had been thriving beneath our notice for millions of years. But here's where our story takes a darker turn, because not everyone was thrilled about this discovery. Within days of Dr. Chen's report reaching the surface, government agencies from around the world began mobilizing. The implications of an advanced non-human civilization existing on Earth were too massive, too potentially destabilizing to be handled through normal scientific channels. Military vessels began converging on the site. Deep-sea mining companies started filing claims. And somewhere in classified briefing rooms, people in suits were making decisions about how to weaponize or monetize contact with the most significant discovery in human history. The ancient civilization below seemed to anticipate this response. The structures that had risen from the depths began to withdraw, sinking back into trenches that sealed themselves with the same deliberate precision they had opened. The bioluminescent networks went dark. The engineered organisms disappeared from the water column, and the seafloor returned to the lifeless appearance that had fooled us for centuries. But they left behind something that changed Dr. Chen forever. A single artifact, small enough to fit in her palm, that continued to pulse with its own internal light. When she held it, she could sense vast networks of intelligence still active in the depths, still watching, still waiting. The artifact seemed to be both a gift and a warning, a demonstration of capabilities so far beyond our current technology that it made our most advanced computers look like pocket calculators, and encoded within its crystalline structure was a message that took months to decode. A message that revealed the true scope of what lies beneath our oceans and what it means for the future of both civilizations sharing this planet. Because what Dr. Chen discovered wasn't just that we're not alone on Earth. She discovered that we never were. That every major development in human civilization, every leap forward in technology and understanding, had been subtly guided by influences from the deep. That the intelligence in our oceans had been studying us, protecting us, and slowly preparing us for the day when we would be ready for contact. The question now is whether we're actually ready for what that contact will reveal about ourselves, about our planet, and about our place in a universe that's far stranger and more interconnected than we ever dared to imagine. But the artifact Dr. Chen discovered wasn't just a communication device, it was a key. And when she finally understood how to activate it, the truth about our planet's hidden history began to unfold in ways that challenged everything we thought we knew about the development of life on Earth. Picture this moment. Dr. Chen, alone in her laboratory at 3 a.m, finally cracks the artifact's activation sequence. The crystalline structure suddenly comes alive, projecting holographic images that fill the room with scenes from our planet's deep past. But these aren't the familiar landscapes we see in nature documentaries. These are views of Earth from the deepest trenches, showing civilizations that rose and fell while the surface world was still dominated by single-celled organisms. The projections revealed vast underwater cities connected by transport networks that spanned ocean basins. Massive organic computers grown from living coral that processed information at speeds that would make our quantum computers look sluggish. Energy harvesting systems that tapped directly into the planet's magnetic field, providing unlimited power for millions of years. And most incredibly, terraforming projects that had been slowly modifying Earth's deep ocean environments for geological ages, preparing them for expansion that would eventually reach the surface. What Dr. Chen was seeing wasn't just evidence of ancient civilization. She was looking at the blueprint for Earth's future. The deep ocean intelligence hadn't been passively observing human development. They had been actively preparing our planet for a merger of surface and deep civilizations that was always part of their long-term plan. But here's where this gets absolutely mind-bending. The artifact showed her that major extinction events in Earth's history weren't random catastrophes. They were controlled resets, carefully orchestrated by the deep civilization to prevent surface life from developing in directions that would be incompatible with their ultimate vision. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs? Deflected by technology we can barely comprehend, timed precisely to allow mammalian evolution to flourish. The ice ages that shaped human development? Climate modifications designed to push our species toward the cognitive capabilities they would need for eventual integration. We weren't just evolving naturally. We were being cultivated, guided along a developmental path that would eventually lead to this moment of contact. Every breakthrough in human technology, every leap in understanding, had been subtly influenced by information flowing up from the depths through channels we never knew existed. Think about our obsession with exploring space while ignoring our own oceans. Think about how we developed nuclear technology before we fully understood marine biology. Think about how our computers evolved to process information in patterns that mirror the neural networks the deep civilization had been using for millions of years. None of this was coincidence. The artifact revealed that key figures throughout human history had been in contact with the deep intelligence, Leonardo da Vinci's impossible flying machines. Inspired by vehicles he saw in visions provided by deep-sea contacts, Tesla's revolutionary understanding of electromagnetic fields, direct downloads of information from civilization that had mastered these forces eons ago. Even our space program bore the hallmarks of guidance from intelligences that had been exploring not just Earth's depths, but the ocean worlds of distant planets for geological ages. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Dr. Chen discovered that the deep civilization wasn't originally from Earth at all. They were refugees from a dying ocean world in a distant star system who had arrived on our planet 4 billion years ago when Earth's oceans were young and lifeless. They had been terraforming our deep oceans ever since, slowly transforming them into a perfect hybrid of their original world and Earth's unique conditions. And now, with surface civilization finally reaching the technological threshold they had been waiting for, it was time for the next phase of their plan: full integration. The merger of two completely different evolutionary paths into something neither species could become alone. The artifact showed Dr. Chen glimpses of what this integration would look like. Humans modified to survive at crushing depths. Their consciousness expanded to process information at the speed of deep ocean neural networks. Cities that existed simultaneously on the surface and in the deepest trenches, connected by transport systems that moved through solid rock as easily as through water. Technologies that could manipulate matter at the molecular level, heal any disease, and extend human lifespan indefinitely. But it also showed her the challenges. The deep civilization operated on timescales that measured change in millions of years, while humans barely planned beyond decades. Their form of consciousness was collective, distributed across vast networks, while human identity was stubbornly individual. Their ethics were based on long-term planetary health, while human morality focused on immediate tribal concerns. The integration wouldn't be easy. It would require fundamental changes in how humans think, how we organize our societies, how we relate to our planet and to each other. Some humans would adapt to these changes. Others would resist them violently, and the outcome of that resistance could determine whether the merger enhanced both civilizations or destroyed them both. Dr. Chen realized she was holding more than just an alien artifact. She was holding the key to humanity's next evolutionary leap and the burden of deciding whether our species was ready to take it. The deep civilization had been patient for millions of years, but their patience wasn't infinite. Other ocean worlds in distant star systems were calling to them, and if humanity couldn't adapt to integration, they would move on, leaving us to face the coming environmental catastrophes alone. But there was something else in the artifact's projections that changed everything. The deep civilization wasn't the only non-human intelligence that had been observing Earth. The universe was filled with ocean worlds, each hosting civilizations that had evolved in the depths of their respective planets. And they were all connected through networks that spanned galactic distances, sharing information and resources in ways that put our primitive internet to shame. Earth wasn't just home to two civilizations on the verge of merger. It was about to become a node in a galactic network of ocean-based intelligences, each offering technologies and knowledge that could solve every major challenge facing both human and deep-sea civilizations. The implications hit Dr. Chen like a physical blow. Climate change, resource depletion, overpopulation, disease, aging, death itself. All of these problems had been solved by civilizations that had faced similar challenges millions of years ago. The solutions were waiting in the depths of our own oceans, held by intelligences that had been preparing for this moment since before the first fish crawled onto land. But accessing those solutions would require a level of trust and cooperation that humanity had never achieved, even among our own species. We would have to overcome not just our fear of the unknown, but our addiction to conflict, our obsession with short-term gain, our inability to think beyond our own limited perspectives. The artifact began showing Dr. Chen scenes from other ocean worlds where the integration had succeeded. Planets where surface and deep civilizations had merged to create societies that spanned from seafloor to space, where every individual had access to the accumulated knowledge of millions of years of evolution, where disease and aging were distant memories, and where the exploration of the universe was a shared adventure rather than a desperate search for resources. But it also showed her worlds where the integration had failed, planets where surface dwellers had tried to exploit or dominate their deep-sea cousins, leading to conflicts that sterilized entire ocean basins, worlds where fear and misunderstanding had prevented cooperation, leaving both civilizations to face extinction alone as their planets succumbed to environmental collapse or cosmic catastrophe. Dr. Chen was looking at humanity's potential futures, and the contrast couldn't have been starker. Integration offered unlimited possibilities, solutions to every major challenge, and expansion into a universe filled with friendly civilizations. Failure offered extinction, either quick through conflict or slow through the environmental disasters that were already beginning to accelerate. The choice seemed obvious, but Dr. Chen knew it wasn't that simple. The deep civilization's timeline for integration was measured in decades, not centuries. They had already waited far longer than usual for a surface species to reach technological maturity, and they couldn't delay indefinitely. Other projects on distant worlds needed their attention, and if humanity couldn't adapt quickly enough, they would have to move on. The artifact's final projection showed Dr. Chen something that made her hands shake as she held it. A countdown, not measured in years or months, but in days. The deep civilization had set a deadline for humanity's response to their offer of integration. If we accepted, the process would begin immediately, with massive changes to both human society and Earth's environment. If we refused or failed to reach consensus, they would withdraw to the deepest parts of the ocean and wait for our civilization to collapse, then try again with whatever species evolved to replace us. Dr. Chen realized she was holding the most important decision in human history, and she had less than a week to make it. But she wasn't just deciding for herself. The artifact had been designed to connect with others, to form a network of humans who would collectively determine our species' response to this unprecedented opportunity. She thought about her colleagues, her family, her entire species, all going about their daily lives, completely unaware that their future was about to be decided by choices made in the deepest, darkest places on Earth. She thought about the children who would inherit whatever world emerged from this decision, and about the ancient intelligences in the depths who had been patiently preparing for this moment since before humans existed. The artifact pulsed in her hands, waiting for her to activate the communication network that would connect her to others around the world who had been chosen for this moment. Scientists, philosophers, leaders, artists, ordinary people whose minds had somehow been identified as capable of grasping the magnitude of what was being offered. Dr. Chen took a deep breath and activated the network, knowing that once she did, there would be no going back. The merger between surface and deep civilizations would begin, and humanity would either evolve into something magnificent beyond our current imagination, or face the consequences of rejecting the greatest opportunity in our species' history. The room filled with holographic faces, people from every continent and culture, all holding identical artifacts, all faced with the same impossible choice. The deep civilization had been more thorough than she had imagined. They hadn't just contacted one human. They had identified representatives from every major group on Earth, ensuring that whatever decision was made would reflect the full spectrum of human diversity and wisdom. And in the depths below, ancient intelligences waited with patience born of geological time, ready to guide humanity into a future beyond our wildest dreams, or to withdraw into the darkness and wait for the next species to evolve the capacity for transcendence. The countdown continued, each second bringing us closer to a transformation that would either elevate humanity beyond recognition or leave us alone with our limitations as the universe moved on without us. The network of chosen humans that Dr. Chen had just joined represented something unprecedented in our species' history. As their holographic forms materialized around her laboratory, she realized these weren't random selections. Each person had been identified through criteria that went beyond simple intelligence or leadership positions. The deep civilization had been analyzing human neural patterns for decades, searching for minds capable of processing information on timescales that spanned millennia rather than moments. Among the faces staring back at her was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a quantum physicist from Tokyo whose research into consciousness had unknowingly been following patterns first established by deep-sea intelligences millions of years ago. There was Maria Santos, an indigenous shaman from the Amazon whose traditional knowledge systems had maintained connections to deep earth wisdom that most modern humans had forgotten. Commander James Wright, a submarine captain who had spent more time in Earth's depths than almost any other human, appeared alongside Dr. Amara Okafor, a marine biologist whose groundbreaking work with extremophile organisms had brought her closer to understanding deep ocean life than she ever realized. But what struck Dr. Chen most profoundly was that many of these individuals had been experiencing strange dreams and visions for months, even years. Dreams of vast underwater cities, of lights moving through crushing darkness, of voices that spoke in mathematical harmonies rather than words. The deep civilization hadn't just been observing human development from a distance. They had been slowly preparing specific individuals for this moment of contact, conditioning their minds to handle information that would shatter ordinary human consciousness. As the network fully activated, Dr. Chen felt her awareness expand in ways that defied description. Suddenly she could perceive not just the other humans in the network, but the vast intelligence that connected them all. The deep civilization wasn't a single species or culture, but rather a collective consciousness distributed across millions of individual organisms, each contributing specialized knowledge to a unified understanding that spanned the entire planet's ocean systems. Through this expanded awareness, she began to comprehend the true scope of what the deep intelligence had accomplished during their 4 billion-year tenure on Earth. They hadn't just been building cities in the depths. They had been slowly transforming the entire planet into a living system where every ocean current, every deep-sea thermal vent, every underwater mountain range served a specific purpose in maintaining planetary stability. The deep civilization had prevented dozens of mass extinction events that would have sterilized Earth's surface. They had deflected asteroids, regulated volcanic activity, and maintained the delicate chemical balance that kept our oceans habitable. Even our planet's magnetic field, which protects us from deadly solar radiation, had been subtly strengthened and stabilized by technologies buried in the deepest trenches. Humanity hadn't just evolved on Earth. We had evolved within a carefully maintained biosphere that had been optimized for the development of surface-based intelligence. Every breath we took, every drop of water we drank, every stable climate pattern that had allowed civilization to flourish, existed because ancient minds in the depths had been working tirelessly to maintain conditions suitable for our development. But Dr. Chen also sensed something else through the network connection. Exhaustion. The deep civilization was tired. 4 billion years of planetary maintenance, of guiding evolution, of preventing catastrophes while remaining hidden from surface awareness, had taken an enormous toll. They needed partners, not just subjects to protect. They needed a surface civilization capable of sharing the burden of planetary stewardship, of contributing new perspectives and capabilities to the collective intelligence that kept Earth habitable. The countdown wasn't arbitrary. It represented the absolute limit of how long the deep civilization could continue maintaining Earth's stability without assistance. Climate change, ocean acidification, massive species extinctions, these weren't just human-caused problems. They were symptoms of a planetary system pushed beyond the capacity of any single intelligence to manage alone. The integration they were offering wasn't just an opportunity for human advancement. It was a desperate need for partnership in preventing the total collapse of Earth's biosphere. Without human cooperation, the deep civilization would have to implement emergency protocols that would stabilize the planet but eliminate most surface life in the process. Through the network, Dr. Chen experienced fragments of memory from the deep intelligence. She saw Earth as it had been billions of years ago, a water world with no continents, where the first refugees from a dying ocean planet had established their initial colonies. She witnessed the gradual terraforming process that had created our current continents, positioned precisely to create the climate patterns and ocean currents that would eventually support human civilization. She observed the careful cultivation of early life forms, the genetic modifications that had steered evolution toward increasingly complex organisms capable of eventually developing intelligence. She watched as the deep civilization had guided the development of photosynthesis, sexual reproduction, multicellular organization, and countless other innovations that had shaped the biosphere we inherited. But most shocking of all, she realized that humans weren't the first surface species the deep civilization had tried to partner with. Over the past billion years, several other intelligent species had evolved on Earth's continents. Some had achieved remarkable technological sophistication before ultimately destroying themselves through warfare or environmental destruction. Others had developed forms of consciousness so alien to both human and deep-sea intelligence that communication had proven impossible. Each failed partnership had taught the deep civilization valuable lessons about the challenges of integrating surface and oceanic intelligence. They had learned to be more patient, more careful in their guidance, more selective in their choice of potential partners. Humanity represented their most successful cultivation project yet, but also possibly their last chance before planetary systems degraded beyond recovery. The other humans in the network were processing similar revelations, their faces showing mixtures of wonder, terror, and overwhelming responsibility. Dr. Tanaka was experiencing quantum mechanical insights that would revolutionize physics if he survived to share them. Maria Santos was connecting with spiritual traditions that had maintained fragmentary knowledge of the deep intelligence across countless generations. Commander Wright was understanding how his submarine experiences had been unconsciously preparing him for this moment of expanded awareness. But it was Dr. Okafor who voiced what they were all thinking. "How do we possibly make this decision for our entire species?" she whispered, her holographic form flickering with the intensity of her emotions. "How do we choose between transformation beyond imagination and the risk of losing everything that makes us human?" The deep intelligence responded through the network, not in words, but in direct conceptual transfer that bypassed language entirely. The choice wasn't between remaining human and becoming something else. It was between evolving into a more complete version of humanity or allowing our species to extinct itself through its own limitations. The modifications they were offering wouldn't eliminate human nature. They would enhance it, allowing individuals to retain their personal identity while gaining access to collective knowledge and capabilities that would solve problems no single human mind could comprehend. Death would become optional, but life would retain its meaning through endless opportunities for growth and exploration. Individual creativity would be amplified rather than suppressed, contributing to collective projects that spanned star systems rather than just continents. Through the network connection, Dr. Chen experienced a vision of integrated humanity. She saw herself not just as Sarah Chen, marine biologist, but as a node in a vast network of consciousness that included every human who chose to join, every deep-sea intelligence, and eventually every ocean-based civilization throughout the galaxy. Her individual thoughts and experiences remained her own, but she also had access to the accumulated wisdom of billions of years of evolution and exploration. In this expanded state, she could perceive solutions to problems that had seemed impossibly complex. Climate change could be reversed through technologies that worked with natural systems rather than against them. Resource scarcity could be eliminated through matter manipulation techniques that converted common elements into anything needed. Disease and aging could be prevented through biological modifications that enhanced rather than replaced natural healing processes. But the vision also showed her the challenges. Not all humans would be able to adapt to expanded consciousness. Some would reject the integration entirely, preferring to remain in familiar limitations rather than risk unknown transformations. Others would adapt partially, creating hybrid societies that retain some human characteristics while gaining access to enhanced capabilities. The deep civilization had prepared for this diversity of responses. They had identified regions of the ocean where unmodified humans could continue living much as they always had, protected and supported but not required to change. They had also designated areas where partial integration could be explored at whatever pace individuals felt comfortable with. And they had prepared vast underwater cities where full integration could be achieved for those ready to embrace complete transformation. The choice wasn't all or nothing for humanity as a species. It was a spectrum of possibilities that would allow different groups to adapt at their own pace while maintaining the overall trajectory toward planetary partnership. But someone had to make the initial decision to begin the process, to open the channels through which these options could be explored. The countdown in Dr. Chen's artifact showed less than 72 hours remaining. 72 hours to decide whether humanity would take the greatest leap in our evolutionary history, or whether we would face the coming crises alone while ancient intelligences withdrew to the deepest places on Earth to wait for our civilization to collapse and something better to evolve in our place. Through the network, she could sense the other chosen humans grappling with the same overwhelming responsibility. Some were already convinced that integration was humanity's only hope for long-term survival. Others worried about the loss of human independence and the risks of trusting alien intelligence, no matter how benevolent it seemed. A few questioned whether they had the right to make such a momentous decision for billions of people who weren't even aware the choice existed. But as the discussion continued through direct mind-to-mind communication that transcended language barriers, a consensus began to emerge. The deep civilization wasn't asking them to decide for all humanity. They were asking them to decide whether to give humanity the opportunity to choose for itself. The integration process could begin with voluntary participants while gradually revealing the full scope of possibilities to the rest of our species. Dr. Chen realized that her role wasn't to determine humanity's future, but to open the door through which that future could be explored. The artifact in her hands wasn't just a communication device or a key to ancient secrets. It was a bridge between two forms of consciousness that had evolved on the same planet, but had never truly met until this moment. As she prepared to activate the next phase of the contact protocol, she thought about all the human dreams and myths about contact with alien intelligence. We had always imagined it coming from the stars, from distant worlds so different from our own that communication would be nearly impossible. We had never considered that the most significant contact in our species' history would come from the deepest parts of our own planet, from intelligences that had been patiently watching over us since before we existed. The irony was profound. While we spent billions of dollars searching for radio signals from space, the most advanced civilization in our local area had been living beneath our feet, maintaining the planetary systems that kept us alive, waiting for us to develop enough wisdom to accept partnership rather than demand dominance. Dr. Chen took a deep breath and activated the final protocol, knowing that once she did, the secret history of Earth would be revealed to humanity, and our species would face the most important decision in our evolutionary journey. The deep intelligence had waited 4 billion years for this moment. Now it was time to see if humanity was ready to join the galactic community of ocean-based civilizations, or if we would choose to face the future alone. The artifact pulsed with increasing intensity, and somewhere in the deepest trenches of every ocean on Earth, ancient machines began to activate, preparing to transform our world in ways that would either elevate humanity beyond our current imagination or challenge us to prove we deserved the partnership we were being offered. The countdown continued, each second bringing us closer to a future that would redefine what it meant to be human in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than we had ever dared to dream. The moment Dr. Chen activated that final protocol, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. Around the globe, sensitive monitoring equipment registered anomalies that defied explanation. Seismographs detected rhythmic pulses emanating from every major ocean trench simultaneously. Satellite imagery captured bioluminescent blooms, spreading across deep ocean surfaces like neural networks firing in perfect synchronization, and in laboratories from MIT to Tokyo, quantum field detectors went haywire as fundamental forces seemed to reorganize themselves according to principles no human physicist had ever encountered. But the most profound changes weren't happening in our instruments. They were happening in the minds of ordinary people who suddenly found themselves remembering dreams they'd never had, understanding languages they'd never learned, and perceiving patterns in reality that had always been there, but somehow invisible until this moment. Sarah Martinez, a kindergarten teacher in Phoenix, Arizona, was reading to her class when she suddenly stopped mid-sentence. The words on the page had transformed into something else entirely, symbols that conveyed meaning not through sound, but through direct conceptual transfer. She looked up to see her 5-year-old students staring at her, with eyes that seemed far older than their years, nodding as if they understood perfectly what was happening. 3,000 miles away, Dr. James Harrison, a retired astrophysicist, was walking his dog along a beach in Maine when every grain of sand beneath his feet began to pulse with its own internal light. The rhythmic flashing formed patterns that his scientific mind recognized immediately as mathematical proofs, but proofs for theorems that wouldn't be developed by human mathematics for centuries. He knelt down and touched the sand, feeling information flow directly into his consciousness, answers to questions that had puzzled him throughout his entire career. In a submarine 3 miles below the surface of the Arctic Ocean, Commander Lisa Torres watched her sonar displays light up with contacts that shouldn't exist. But these weren't enemy vessels or unidentified objects. They were geometric structures rising from the seafloor, architecture that seemed to grow rather than be built, reaching upward through the water column with organic grace that defied every principle of underwater engineering she'd ever learned. The transformation wasn't happening to everyone at the same rate or in the same way. Some humans seemed naturally attuned to the expanding consciousness, adapting to new forms of perception as easily as adjusting to a different time zone. Others experienced the changes as overwhelming sensory floods that left them disoriented and frightened, and a significant portion of the population remained completely unaware that anything unusual was occurring, going about their daily routines, while reality quietly restructured itself around them. Dr. Chen, still connected to the network of chosen individuals, could perceive all of these changes simultaneously. Through her expanded awareness, she experienced the kindergarten teacher's moment of linguistic transcendence, felt the astrophysicist's wonder at mathematical revelations, and shared the submarine commander's awe at architectural impossibilities rising from the depths. But she also sensed something else: resistance. Not just the natural human fear of change, but organized opposition from institutions and individuals who viewed the emerging transformation as a threat to established power structures. Military communications networks buzzed with classified discussions about containing the phenomenon, corporate boardrooms filled with executives calculating how to monetize or weaponize contact with alien intelligence. Government officials demanded answers that scientists couldn't provide, and solutions that didn't exist for problems they couldn't comprehend. The deep civilization had anticipated this reaction. Through the network, Dr. Chen received impressions of similar responses from other worlds where integration had been attempted. Surface-dwelling species often split into factions during first contact, with some embracing transformation while others fought desperately to maintain familiar limitations. The outcome of these internal conflicts usually determined whether integration succeeded or failed catastrophically. But Earth's situation was more complex than previous integration attempts, because humanity had developed global communication systems that allowed information to spread faster than social institutions could adapt to process it. Within hours of the protocol activation, video footage of impossible phenomena was circulating on social media platforms. Scientists were live streaming their encounters with technologies that violated known physical laws. Ordinary people were sharing experiences that sounded like science fiction but were happening to millions of individuals simultaneously. Traditional gatekeepers of information, the media organizations, government agencies, and academic institutions that usually controlled the narrative during major events, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer volume and impossibility of what was occurring. How do you debunk footage of cities rising from ocean trenches when the footage is coming from dozens of independent sources? How do you dismiss scientific measurements when they're being replicated in laboratories around the world? How do you maintain social order when the fundamental assumptions about reality that hold society together are being challenged by direct experience rather than mere theory? Dr. Chen watched through the network as humanity began to fracture along lines that had nothing to do with traditional divisions of race, nationality, or religion. Instead, people were separating into those who could adapt to expanded consciousness and those who couldn't, those who welcomed integration with alien intelligence and those who feared it, those who saw the transformation as evolution and those who perceived it as invasion. The deep civilization responded to this fragmentation with a patience that only came from experiencing similar scenarios across countless worlds over millions of years. Rather than forcing integration on reluctant populations, they began implementing what they called graduated revelation, a process that allowed different human communities to engage with the transformation at whatever level they could handle. In some regions, the changes remained subtle: enhanced intuition, improved pattern recognition, occasional glimpses of expanded awareness that could be dismissed as imagination if necessary. People in these areas could continue their normal lives while gradually becoming accustomed to new possibilities. Other regions experienced more dramatic transformations. Entire coastlines found themselves connected to underwater networks that provided access to technologies beyond current human understanding. Coastal cities discovered they could communicate directly with intelligence in the depths, receiving solutions to problems ranging from environmental restoration to disease treatment to energy generation. And in a few carefully selected locations, full integration was offered to volunteers. These individuals underwent biological modifications that allowed them to survive at ocean depths previously lethal to human life, while retaining their essential humanity enhanced rather than replaced by alien capabilities. Dr. Chen realized she was witnessing the birth of a new phase in human evolution, but one unlike anything that had occurred naturally on Earth before. Instead of random mutations and environmental pressures driving change over millions of years, conscious intelligence was guiding transformation in real time, allowing individuals to choose their own evolutionary path based on their personal capacity for adaptation. Through the network, she experienced the first successful human deep-sea partnerships. Marine biologists working alongside creatures that had been studying ocean ecosystems for millions of years, developing conservation strategies that worked with natural systems rather than against them. Engineers collaborating with intelligences that understood matter manipulation at the quantum level, creating technologies that seemed to violate thermodynamics, but actually worked by accessing energy sources humans had never detected. Artists were perhaps the most surprising beneficiaries of early integration. The deep civilization's understanding of consciousness included aesthetic dimensions that human art had only approximated. Musicians found themselves composing symphonies that incorporated frequencies below and above human hearing ranges, creating emotional experiences that touched listeners at levels deeper than conventional music could reach. Visual artists discovered techniques for manipulating light and color in ways that created images which seemed to shift and evolve based on the viewer's mental state. But for every success story, Dr. Chen also perceived failures and conflicts. Military units attempting to capture and weaponize deep-sea technologies found their equipment mysteriously malfunctioning whenever they approached integration sites. Corporate attempts to exploit new resources triggered defensive responses from ocean intelligence that shut down entire coastal regions until the threats were withdrawn. Government efforts to control or contain the phenomenon met with forms of resistance that seemed to anticipate official responses before they were even formulated. The deep civilization wasn't passive in the face of these challenges. They had learned from previous integration attempts that surface species often required protection from their own destructive impulses during transition periods. Technologies that could have solved humanity's energy crisis were withheld from nations that showed signs of weaponizing them. Medical advances that could eliminate most diseases were shared only with communities that demonstrated commitment to using them for collective benefit rather than individual profit. This selective sharing created new tensions within human society. Why were some communities receiving miraculous technologies while others remained locked out? Why were certain individuals chosen for enhancement while others were left unchanged? The answers lay in criteria that the deep civilization had developed over millions of years of observing intelligent species, criteria based not on political power or economic status, but on psychological readiness for responsibility that transcended individual self-interest. Dr. Chen found herself becoming a bridge between these different human responses to integration. Her position in the original contact network made her a natural intermediary between fully integrated individuals and those still struggling to accept the new reality. Through her, questions and concerns from unenhanced humans could be communicated to the deep intelligence, while insights and solutions from the ocean civilization could be translated into forms that surface dwellers could comprehend and implement. One of the most frequent questions she encountered was whether the integration was reversible. Could humans who underwent biological modifications return to their original state if they decided the changes were too overwhelming? The answer was both reassuring and troubling. Physical modifications could indeed be reversed, but the expansion of consciousness that came with integration seemed to be permanent. Once individuals experienced the broader perspective that came with connection to ocean intelligence, they found it impossible to return to the limited awareness they had possessed before. This irreversibility created a profound psychological barrier for many humans considering integration. The fear of losing their essential humanity, of becoming something fundamentally different from what they had always been, proved stronger than the attraction of enhanced capabilities and expanded awareness. Even when presented with evidence of the benefits that integrated individuals were experiencing, many people chose to remain in familiar limitations rather than risk unknown transformations. The deep civilization had expected this resistance, but they hadn't anticipated how effectively human, social, and economic systems would adapt to create artificial scarcity around integration opportunities. Black markets emerged where wealthy individuals attempted to purchase access to enhancement technologies. Criminal organizations tried to kidnap integrated humans to extract their biological modifications. Some governments declared integration illegal, while simultaneously conducting classified research to develop their own versions of alien technologies. These responses created exactly the kind of social instability that had led to integration failures on other worlds. Dr. Chen could sense growing concern among the ocean intelligence as they observed humanity's tendency to turn every opportunity into a source of conflict and exploitation. The countdown that had once measured time until integration began was now measuring time until the deep civilization would be forced to withdraw their offer and implement emergency planetary stabilization protocols that would preserve Earth's biosphere but eliminate most surface civilization. The irony was devastating. Humanity was being offered solutions to every major challenge facing our species, partnership with intelligence that had successfully maintained planetary stability for billions of years, and access to a galactic community of ocean-based civilizations. But our inability to cooperate, even in the face of unprecedented opportunity, was threatening to cost us the greatest chance for advancement in our evolutionary history. Dr. Chen realized that her role was evolving beyond simple communication between species. She was becoming a catalyst for the kind of fundamental change in human consciousness that would be necessary for integration to succeed. Not just biological enhancement or technological advancement, but a transformation in how humans related to each other and to their planet that would make them worthy partners for intelligence that had been nurturing life for geological ages. Through the network, she began broadcasting not just information about integration possibilities, but examples of successful human cooperation that demonstrated our species' potential for transcending destructive patterns. Stories of communities that had welcomed integrated individuals and benefited from their enhanced capabilities. Examples of governments that had chosen collaboration over control and discovered that sharing power with enhanced citizens actually strengthened rather than weakened their societies. Most importantly, she shared visions of what Earth could become if integration succeeded. A world where the artificial scarcity that drove so much human conflict had been eliminated through technologies that could convert matter at the molecular level, where disease and aging were optional rather than inevitable, where the exploration of space was conducted in partnership with civilizations that had been traveling between star systems for millions of years. But she also made it clear that these possibilities required a level of cooperation and wisdom that humanity had never achieved. The deep civilization wouldn't share their most powerful technologies with a species that might use them for self-destruction. They wouldn't invest further resources in integration if human society couldn't evolve beyond the competitive patterns that had served us during our primitive development, but were now obstacles to advancement. The countdown continued, but its meaning had changed. It no longer measured time until integration began, but time until humanity would have to demonstrate that we deserved the partnership we were being offered. The deep civilization was prepared to wait no longer. Either we would evolve into worthy partners within the remaining time, or they would withdraw to the deepest places on Earth and begin preparing for the next intelligent species that might eventually evolve from the ashes of our civilization. Dr. Chen looked at the artifact still pulsing in her hands and realized that the most important decision in human history wasn't being made in government buildings or corporate boardrooms. It was being made in the hearts and minds of ordinary people who were choosing every day whether to embrace the transformation that would elevate our species or cling to familiar limitations that would ultimately destroy us. The deep intelligence had given humanity the tools for transcendence. Whether we would use them to build a better future or turn them into weapons for our own destruction remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: the universe was watching, and our response to this unprecedented opportunity would determine not just our own fate, but our worthiness to join the community of civilizations that had already learned to cooperate across the vastness of space and time. The weight of that realization settled over humanity like the crushing pressure of the deepest ocean trenches. We were facing our final exam as a species, and the grading criteria were unlike anything we had ever encountered. Success wouldn't be measured by military strength or economic dominance or technological prowess alone. It would be measured by our capacity for wisdom, our ability to think beyond individual gain, our willingness to become something greater than the sum of our competitive parts. In the 71 hours that remained, extraordinary things began happening in the most ordinary places. A grocery store clerk in Portland who had experienced the consciousness expansion found herself mediating a dispute between integrated and unenhanced customers, somehow helping both groups understand that their differences were temporary growing pains rather than permanent divisions. Her natural empathy, amplified by connection to ocean intelligence, created a bubble of peace that spread through her entire neighborhood. A construction worker in Mumbai discovered that his enhanced perception allowed him to see structural flaws in buildings before they became dangerous. Instead of using this ability for personal profit, he began volunteering his time to inspect schools and hospitals, preventing disasters that would have claimed hundreds of lives. His example inspired others in his community to view their enhancements as responsibilities rather than advantages. But for every story of cooperation and wisdom, there were counterexamples that made Dr. Chen's heart sink. A tech billionaire in Silicon Valley had attempted to reverse engineer integrated biology, planning to create a commercial version that would make him the wealthiest person in human history. His experiments had triggered a defensive response from nearby ocean intelligence that shut down power grids across 3 states until his research was abandoned. Military contractors were discovering that any attempt to weaponize deep-sea technologies resulted in immediate and complete system failures. Weapons designed using alien principles simply refused to function when targeted at other humans. Defense systems based on ocean intelligence would protect any target, regardless of national boundaries or political affiliations. The deep civilization had apparently learned from observing countless species that the same technologies which could elevate civilization could also destroy it, and they had built safeguards into every gift they offered. These safeguards were forcing humanity to confront fundamental questions about power, control, and the nature of civilization itself. How do you maintain traditional authority structures when the most advanced technologies only work for those who demonstrate genuine concern for collective welfare? How do you preserve national boundaries when ocean intelligence treats all humans as members of a single planetary community? How do you maintain economic systems based on scarcity when matter manipulation technologies could provide abundance for everyone? Dr. Chen watched through the network as these questions sparked debates that went far beyond politics or economics. They were philosophical challenges that struck at the heart of human identity. What did it mean to be human when the definition of humanity was expanding to include capabilities that had once been considered divine? What was the purpose of individual existence when consciousness could be shared across vast networks of intelligence? What was the value of personal achievement when collective wisdom could solve problems that no individual mind could even comprehend? The deep civilization observed these debates with interest but didn't intervene. They had learned that each species needed to resolve these questions for themselves, that imposed solutions rarely survived the transition to full integration. Their role was to provide opportunities and guidance, not to make choices that could only be meaningful if they emerged from genuine understanding rather than external pressure. But time was running short, and the patience of ocean intelligence, while vast, wasn't infinite. Other worlds in distant star systems were calling for their attention, civilizations that had already demonstrated their readiness for advancement and were waiting for partnership in projects that spanned galactic distances. Earth represented just one node in a network of possibilities, and if humanity couldn't prove its worthiness within the allotted time, resources would have to be redirected to more promising opportunities. So here we are, at the edge of the deepest question our species has ever faced. As Dr. Chen's artifact continues to pulse in her hands, and that countdown ticks towards zero, we're left staring into an abyss that reflects not just the crushing depths of our oceans, but the unfathomable depths of possibility itself. Whether the intelligence rising from our planet's deepest trenches represents salvation or transformation beyond recognition, one thing becomes crystal clear. The universe has been far stranger, far more alive, and far more patient than we ever dared imagine. And maybe, just maybe, the real aliens aren't coming from the stars at all. They've been here all along, waiting in the darkness below, watching us grow up enough to finally join the conversation that's been happening in Earth's depths for 4 billion years.